And we are live.
Hello, and welcome to the Accountant Success Secrets podcast, edition number 6, with me, Mark Lee.
And me, Philippa Haynes.
Great. We have been running this podcast. We've interviewed 5 great accountants so far. And just by way of background, the criteria that we set for the accountants we interview was that they've been running their own practice for at least 5 years. And while they might still be looking to grow further, they feel that the practice is already generating a decent living for them. It's grown successfully to date, and we asked them to explain how they navigated tougher times, if they did. And we want them to share something that in or with their practice that's distinct and distinguishable from most other accountants, something that helps them to stand out from the others. And we hope that by doing that, the interview is of value to you, the listener or the viewer.
Yeah, and I think both of us are very keen to ensure that accountants stand out, and that's certainly what I'm all about. And when I say stand out, I mean there is so much talent out there that there's a lot of noise as well, and we just wanted to ensure that the talent that we know of gets that little bit of limelight for those 30 minutes to share their insights and learnings. And there's some real gems, I think, which we're going to be talking about shortly.
Absolutely right. You will have noticed, if you've watched any of the podcasts today, our interviewees come from around the country. We're evidently not London focused, and not everybody who's approached us or who we've approached has either agreed to come on the podcast or ends up being suitable to come on the podcast. But as we'll remind you at the end, if you feel you match our criteria and would like to be featured, do get in touch with either of us. As I say, we wanted to have a review edition of the podcast. That's what this is. Philippa and I have each reviewed the 5 podcasts interviews that we've already done, and we've each picked out one particular learning point that we think has special value for podcast listeners, and we wanted to highlight them for you. The first of our 5 great interviewees was David Frederick, who runs Marcus Bishop Associates. And Philippa, do you want to go first in terms of the point you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, what a star David was. He's just really a great personality, big personality, and called himself the accidental accountant. But on a serious note, he talked about networking up, which I thought was a lovely phrase. And we both, you and I, Mark, really like that. And that was all about having people on your side who are senior to you, who have been kind of experienced some of the stuff that you haven't. So when he decided to leave a large firm and set up himself, he surrounded himself with senior and experienced people who pushed him forward and who said, just take that one step at a time, but really go for it. So that enabled him to begin to build his kind of mindset, his just kind of the courage to move forward. So that was the bit that really was interesting to me. And what about you, Mark? What did you pull out?
Well, as you say, there was so much, and I know we're going to say this as we talk about each of the podcasts we've already done. Well, I wanted to pull out something that David referenced in terms of his service to clients and his preference when he's producing cash flow forecasts for clients to help them to create 3 different cash flow forecasts. One looking at sort of the minimum likely outcome from what they're doing, one that looks at a realistic outcome, and one that is perhaps a little bit more ambitious. And then David explained how averaging those down can create a more accurate prediction for the client's business and cash flows. And one of the reasons I particularly like that, I think, is, and I should mention, David is a very enthusiastic member of my Soul Practice Club. And some years before that, he was a keen member of the Inner Circle, which was a roundtable version that I did of what's now an online group. And in the inner circle, I shared a spreadsheet that I'd once prepared to help an accountant I was mentoring. And it was pretty much along the same lines that David talks about that he uses with his clients. So I like to feel that I inspired it. And I still share it with some accountants because it helps with plans, choices and decisions regarding their targets and ambitions and capacity planning. But leaving that to one side, David's enthusiasm for that approach to helping his clients, being focused on what they want and need, I think is really admirable.
Yeah, totally. He's a very, very engaging character as well. I'm sure that, you know, he really puts his clients at ease.
I'm sure.
Good.
So our second interviewee was Della Hudson, whose current practice is called Minerva Accountants. And I think the point that I particularly wanted to pull out, because nobody else has mentioned it, was she's suffered some challenges or disasters almost in her practices, her first practice before she ultimately sold it. But she stressed the importance of having a disaster recovery and backup plans, and how that involves, in my words, almost having an insurance system in place to know what you will do if things fall apart, if you struggle, if key members of staff leave, if you suddenly have to boost your client base. What would you do in order to recover from those challenges? And I love the way Della talked about how she's achieved that over the years. And what about you, Philippa? What did you take from?
Yeah, I mean, I think Della has always sells herself short when we all know that she's fantastic. And she's very much, I would say, a really impressive technology leader before her time. You know, she was doing it years and years before everybody was talking about tech and AI. And that came about, I think, from her story, just by putting in place little things, nothing really blockbuster, but ways of managing her time, ways of systemizing certain actions so that she could be more efficient. So as things progressed and as she added things, what she came to have developed was a really fantastic ecosystem, really, which meant that if necessary, she no longer needed to be within the business 24/7. And I don't necessarily think that that was what she expected, but actually little by little that journey has become really powerful. So I loved that.
You're absolutely right. Della is one of the most humble and unassuming successful accountants I think I know, and also an author of books. She's a mentor for accountants as well. And you mentioned 24/7 there. We shouldn't forget that she told us that she'd built her practice within a 25-hour week. 25-hour week, school week, if you like.
Yeah.
Between drop-offs and pickups. Just astonishing and so unassuming with it all. Absolutely wonderful. I've got an enormous amount of time for Della, and still always talk about her first book whenever anybody approaches me for advice on starting up an accounting practice. I don't think you can do better than get hold of The Numbers Business by Della Hudson.
Yeah, totally agree. I have a copy here on my desk, in fact. So we move on then, don't we, to Lorraine Ellison of Simply Accountants, I think I'm right in saying. And she was larger than life, a little bit like David. I think people really, really enjoyed the 30 minutes that we shared with her, just because she's been around the block, she's very experienced, and she had a sort of devil may care, really, when it came to how she approached her business. And one of the things I took out primarily was this no list, which was, no, I won't do that. No, you're not the right prospect. No, no, no. And she built up a sort of tick list, which I think sounds a little bit kind of flippant, but in fact, it shows the breadth of experience and how she has really built up that confidence to say no, because she also has had some dark days and some real kind of issues and been overworked and had many stresses. And that's obviously led to her developing more resilience and actually understanding her value. And that no list, I think, shows that she knows who she is. She has a brand and she's not actually going to move away from that brand. So when we talk about brand, for me, it's not this logo or this design. It's about that foundational piece that you know exactly what you're about, who you want for your business. And if they're not right, you're able to say no. And that is very liberating. What about you, Mark? What did you find?
Well, I've known Lorraine for years. She first approached me in 2017. We were both at the Intuit QuickBooks Connect conference in San Jose in America. She was there as a potential winner of QuickBooks User of the Year or something from the UK. I was there as an influencer. And I still remember how she came up and said hello. We had a lovely chat. There weren't that many Brits there. And I was just super impressed by her whole style and approach back then. And we've stayed in touch, which is why I recommended her for the podcast. She's never been a client of mine, but amongst all the things she talked about, the one that I also was going to pull out was her no list, and having clear criteria for the type of clients that she wants to work with, that she's comfortable to work with, that's reflected on her website, reflected in the way that she talks about her practice and what she does. And unlike some less experienced accountants, she doesn't just say yes to whatever clients want. She is the expert, she is in control, and with her gloriously laid back, easy style, she can still make sure that they do what they need to do. And it's their responsibility if things don't go right, because she can only sort things out so far. And I really admire her confidence in being able to put that across to clients in a compelling way that evidences that she's the expert, they're paying for her expertise, and they need to treat her with respect. She didn't actually say that, but that's the implication of her whole style and approach. And yeah. I think there's a real lesson there for other accountants who may be tempted sometimes to let clients walk all over them. It's a big confidence issue that can come with experience. It's something I've talked about a lot with some of my clients, helping them build up their own self-confidence. And it's just a really powerful lesson, I thought, for listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I actually met up with Lorraine before Accountex North because we were in the same hotel and we had a couple of hours together over a glass of wine. And she was interrupted actually by a client who was in one heck of a mess, in fact. But she was very helpful and nurturing, but also, you know, as you said, she told it like it was and really said, this is what you need to do. So I saw her in action. So she has the gift of knowing who she is, being confident and not allowing people to walk over her, but also having that nurturing kind of feel as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And that meetup you had was after the podcast interview, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I just thought she was so wonderful that I wanted to have a little bit more of a chat with her. And so Lovely. We did.
Next up, we had Martin Cavey, who runs Chorus Accounting. Yeah. And I love the way, just such a delightful, lovely, gentle man. And I love the way he talked about making YouTube videos to help his clients. But I think one of the things that really resonated with me was his whole style and approach to giving back, which was evidenced, I think, in two ways. First of all, his commitment to training staff and encouraging them to move on to a bigger firm when the time was right, even though that would leave a hole in his practice. But also Martin's involvement in various roles within the ICAEW, including being district society president. And I think I detected that Martin's commitment here reflects a similar ethos of my own. I've been involved in voluntary work for the Institute for many, many years. And I think we both get a sense of satisfaction and maybe even achievement if we're able to help influence some positive change. But that's about it. We don't do it to benefit our business directly or even to make valuable business connections. If those come, it's a welcome byproduct, but it's not a reason for either Martin or myself doing our volunteering. And yet, like Martin, I feel it can be so rewarding, and I would encourage others to do it. Indeed, I remember David, our first interviewee, also talked about his volunteering work within the AAT, which he then went on to be president of, a fact which I don't think he shared during the podcast, because again, a bit like Della, very humble and unassuming, has achieved what he's achieved because he's a lovely person. And Martin is much the same in that regard.
Yeah, Martin, I would describe as he has a sort of grounded energy. He's quite a sort of, he's calm but resilient and a good person. And I think the story you've just told about, you know, training somebody up and then them leaving, he was talking about that with us, wasn't he? And I think the mark of the person is how you let somebody go. And he was very positive about it, whilst, you know, it was a pain for him. You know, he'd almost train them up in order to leave the nest. But he was very big, excuse me, he was very big with that. But anyway, one of the points for me was obviously about the personal tragedy to his story, which was one of his twin daughters died very early on. And it's unimaginable. You know, there's nothing, I don't think there's much worse than that. But at the time, he said, you know, I have a choice. I can carry on or not. And he dug deep. I think his mindset and his resilience really kicked in. And I think that has really, you know, been very important for how he has moved forward with his business. So he's managed to grow, he's managed to overcome challenges by having that kind of resilience, which sadly came at a cost, but he's drawn from it and drawn from that to give him the energy. And I think that's incredibly kind of important for what he's doing. And actually, it's a bit like Della, who has the technology around her for disaster. I think what he has is that emotional resilience, so that, you know, I'm sure that during the pandemic, you know, he was possibly one of the calmest, most able accountants to serve his clients in that terrible situation, because he'd been there, and so he would probably be able to rise to the challenge. So that, you know, it's having that resilience and being able to move forward that I think is incredible.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very admirable, and yet again, very unassuming with it. And yeah. I am noticing this trend in our interviewees, that nobody's aggressive, nobody's an unpleasant person, because almost by definition we wouldn't, or arrogant. Definitely not. There's no arrogance amongst any of our interviewees, because almost by definition, that's not the sort of people that I work with. And those first four interviewees were all people that I knew and had spent some time with one way or another. Our fifth interviewee was the first person that we interviewed whom I didn't know personally before the interview. So that made it an interesting challenge and risk for me, almost. You've very kindly trusted me throughout, and I appreciate that. And our fifth interviewee was Claire Owen Jones from Loud and Clear Accounting. And she approached us having seen that we'd been running the podcast, and wondered if we thought that she fitted the bill. And she wasn't sure. She certainly wasn't arrogant about it when inviting herself, because she recognizes that she's neurodiverse, and therefore she might be approaching us inappropriately. And it was wonderful the way that she addressed that in her first approach. And we talked to her and concluded, yes, she'd be a fine interviewee. But I'll let you give your key point from the first.
Well, I just thought that it was fascinating. There were so many different facets to her, which I think are brilliant for everybody's learning within this industry and further afield. I mean, one of the things that struck me was that she is a fantastic example of the good and the bad around niching. So we're all talking about niching and whether it's for them or not. And there's a lot of red herrings and a lot of misunderstanding and anxiety. And I think Claire experienced all of that. So Claire left a large firm where she focused on dental clients, I think she said.
That's right.
Yeah. And she really enjoyed that during her time. Anyway, she decided to set up her own firm, and thought naturally, I work with dentists, so I'm going to do that in my own practice. And actually, lo and behold, it didn't work, because she realized that when she got closer to that particular type of client, the day-to-day, because it was her own business, she didn't actually enjoy it. It's not that she didn't like them, it's just she didn't enjoy the day-to-day, and felt a lot more dislocated than she had done in a larger firm, which I totally understand. So what she did, and this is the success story with niching, is over time, and it wasn't a sort of straight away thing, but she realized that her other passion, apart from accounting, was fine art. And, she has a fine art degree and she is incredibly talented. And she started to think about working with more creative businesses. So kind of really niche in on the creative side of industry. And that worked incredibly well for her, because firstly, it was authentic. It was exactly what she's passionate about. She had that experience, that mentality, because she was an artist herself. So she knew how to approach her clients and prospects. She could talk their language and really sympathize with what they were going through day to day. And that really is so valuable. That is the added value. That is the secret sauce or the glue that brings real success if you get it right. So her niche came gradually, and she made a bit of a mistake, but ultimately she realized that if she focused in, there was a really fantastic win-win scenario. And that's where niching can be incredibly powerful if you think about it and you're more strategic in how you approach it. So that would be, something that I think is a great learning. Mark, I know that you also had some thoughts on Claire. So you.
Yeah, and just before I go into those, I want to stress that for anybody watching or listening, you've had a tiny example there of Philippa's approach in terms of helping accountants to stand out and to find their marketing niche, then to find out what it is about themselves that enables them to build a more successful practice. I absolutely love and admire Philippa's approach there, and the way she talks about Claire is a great example of that. Just a little idea of what it's all about. The thing I picked up on, as I say, was Claire's recognition of her own neurodiversity, and recognizing that a number of her clients in the creative world had ADHD, dyslexia, autism, or whatever. And she looked at ways in which she could better serve neurodiverse clients. And in particular, that means giving them a choice as regards how she communicates with them and how they communicate with her. And she's all about providing exceptional service. So giving clients the opportunity to choose how she communicates with them and how they communicate with her, I think is a really powerful example of that. And also a lesson for those of us who I'm going to say those of us who are not neurodiverse. I appreciate it's a spectrum. We're all on the spectrum somewhere.
Mm.
But it's very easy for accountants, and I get accountants in one-to-one mentoring will tell me about clients of theirs who don't respond to emails. They'll send 3 or 4 emails and they don't get a response. And this is particularly common when it comes to trying to beat the 31st of January or indeed any other deadline. Towards the end of the period when the deadline appears, it'd be very common for accountants or a member of their team to actually pick up the phone and talk to a client to get them to send whatever information it is that the accountant needs. And the question I often ask is, what would happen if you phoned them earlier? And it was only really talking to Claire that I realized that it might be one reason why some clients might respond better to a phone call than to an email is because of their neurodiversity and because they are better able to deal with telephone requests than long emails or indeed short emails. They may be dyslexic and struggle with reading. And typically that's not something that accountants look to find out about from their clients. And maybe it should be, and maybe it would ease frustrations with clients who appear not to be doing what it is they need to do when they need to do it. Maybe accountants could look at finding whether a different form of communication might generate the response that they need. So something to consider there.
And I think that's, obviously you're talking about all of these scenarios in your Soul Practice Club with your clients, and obviously coaching through many issues including leadership and communication, etc. But yeah, I just love how Claire came across, and I love the fact she actually uses Loom videos as well, and has done for a long time actually, because she felt that it was easier to equip people sooner rather than later, and especially if you are neurodiverse, often it's much easier there. So just putting herself in her client's shoes and being able to do that really easily, because that's what she's like, it again is quite a potent relationship there.
You're right. And a related point to all that is that Claire recognized that she was uncomfortable at face-to-face networking events. Again, attributing that to being neurodiverse and uncomfortable in groups like that. And that's common for a lot of accountants, whether neurodiverse or not. Yeah. And Claire has managed to make a success of online networkings and building a solid community in Facebook groups, where she provides value and quick answers to stay connected with people. And they then approach her for business. And the point I would stress here, as I always do, is that works for Claire because the type of people that she wants to have as clients are active in those groups. It wouldn't work if she was looking to engage with very successful business leaders with large companies, because they tend not to be active in those Facebook groups. So always a question of know your target audience and where they hang out.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree more, obviously, on that one. And it's interesting that you talked about being you, because I think that's exactly what Claire does. She has decided what she's about and what her strengths are, and she's doing it her way. And I'll be talking a lot more about that at the ICB Summit, November the 9th, with my seminar, which is called Stand Out and Be You, which is about staying strong to your values and who you are once you know what you're all about. And I think Claire is a great example of that.
That is wonderful. I have a talk I've done many times on how accountants can be better remembered, referred, and recommended, the 3 R's. Nice. And part of that is looking at how to stand out in a way that suits you rather than in what might be considered the traditional ways. But let's not divert.
No, exactly.
Into all that. Now I know we're on the same page there. We're probably coming up to time. We should be closing. Philippa, if anybody wants to get in touch with you at Insight 101, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Well, certainly LinkedIn is always a strong way for me, or go to my website, insight101.co.uk. Obviously, if you're going to be at the ICB, then come along to my talk, and hopefully you can learn more. I shall be offering some free 20-minute catch-ups, so that will be an interesting one. Mark, what about you? How can we find you?
Well, online everywhere, because my name Mark Lee is so common. Online everywhere, I'm Bookmark Lee. Even my business card is a bookmark. So LinkedIn, Bookmark Lee, my website, bookmarklee.co.uk. Also full details there of the different mentoring packages I offer, and of the Sole Practice Club, which you'll never guess is for sole practitioner accountants, with or without staff. Some have, some don't. But I'd be delighted to, if you want to get in touch and have a chat at any stage.
Yeah, and I think now all that's left to say is we hope you've enjoyed this. We really wanted to add a bit more value to what we're doing. And if you feel that, you've learned a lot, you've really enjoyed the interviews, but you'd like to have your say as well, we would love to hear from you. I think Mark was quite clear on, who we're looking for, the types, the sort of size, and how long you've been in practice. But we all have a story to tell, and we all deserve to stand out. So this is your opportunity. So we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch with us either via email or on LinkedIn. Just drop us a message.
Absolutely. If you do that, I'll then send you our normal invite and ask you to confirm that you meet the criteria. And if you do, we'll look to set up a date when we can interview you. Thanks so much for watching or listening today, and we look forward to seeing you on future editions of the Accountant Success Secrets podcast. Hey, I got it out in one go, correctly.
Well done. Yeah. Yeah, great to see you again, Mark. Thank you for the chat, and I hope everybody's enjoyed it. So we'll say goodbye for now.
Bye all.
Bye all. Bye.